Foreword of London Tradesmen. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. London Tradesmen by Anthony Trollope. Foreword. Trollope was 65 years old when he wrote the series of sketches here reprinted from the Pall Mall Gazette and for the first time issued in book form. Not for a considerable while had he attempted any journalism beyond an occasional book review or travel letter from abroad, and it may at first seem curious that he should thus have undertaken, in the evening of his life, a purely journalistic task and one which could not possibly compensate him, either by reputation or by financial result, for the considerable physical exertion involved in its performance. For exertion there inevitably was. A young relative who accompanied him on one or two of the expeditions necessary to the collection of copy, those, for example, to Billingsgate and Covent Garden, has a vivid memory of the zest with which the old novelist set off in the small hours of the morning to the central fish and vegetable markets, of the voracious rapidity when on the spot of his observation and questionings, and of his return to breakfast, tired but triumphant, with sufficient material stored in his skilfully receptive mind for an article 10 times as long as that which he intended to produce. And yet, by those who appreciate what manner of man was Anthony Trollope, this 11th-hour excursion into strenuous realism will without difficulty be understood. There were, surely, two main impulses to the enterprise, both of them characteristically defiant. The first was the old man's obstinate determination not to be downed, either by the lassitude or the frailty of old age. In contracting to supply the Pall Mall Gazette this series of London vignettes, the actuality and vividness of which depended absolutely on their writer's personal and up-to-date knowledge of traders and their ways, he threw down a challenge to his own infirmity. In precisely the same way, but this time with tragic result, he was 2 years later to insist on crossing to Ireland to obtain first-hand material for his novel, The Landleaguers. This final impudence killed him, and one may not doubt that Covent Garden, Smithfield, and Billingsgate, in the cold darkness of early mornings during 1880, contributed their little share of weakening to the already toil-worn constitution of one of the hardest workers of the 19th century. Nevertheless, Trollope took his risk with open eyes. Be sure that whosoever at the time may have dreaded the headstrong energies of his old age, whosoever may have lamented that by a little care of self he did not add another 10 years to his life, the old man himself had neither hesitation nor regrets. He lived for work. By work he died. And if on one hand the writing of these studies of London tradesmen was a gesture of defiance to his own weakness, on the other it was a blow struck for the old England which he loved against the newer England which he loathed. From one point of view, the little series is a kind of miniature afterthought to that immense protest against the degrading commercialism of the 70s, the long and angry novel called The Way We Live Now. Throughout the articles runs a lament against the passing of the small individual shopkeeper, with a clientele of friends and a reliance on quality and service to build up a steady sufficiency of customers, and his substitution by the advertising middleman. Compare the coal merchant. By the department store. Compare the haberdasher, and by the specious canvasser with his house-to-house impertinence. Compare the wine merchant. Of such phenomena, the England which Trollope loved so well, interpreted so faithfully, was largely innocent. That they were invading her dignified reserve, mocking her traditional values, tarnishing her honesty, caused him so fierce an agony that, like the reckless bull of an Englishman he was, he could not but drop his horns and rush roaring on the enemy. It was, therefore, on a basis of characteristically aggressive emotion that Trollope erected this series of slight but shrewd studies for retailers' portraiture. And for all their slightness, they are wonderfully his own. No less than his other larger work, they are full of his peculiar qualities and convictions, so that the mental references which they provoke are numerous and interesting. Reading The Tailor, one remembers Neefit in Ralph the Heir and Thwaites in Lady Anna. Clearly, Trollope had a feeling for tailors, but what a pity that he never transcribed in a novel the standard conversation between a man who is buying clothes and a man who is making them. The conversation here so brilliantly characterized. In this summary of the sort of talk a man has with his tailor is revealed, as clearly as in anything that Trollope ever wrote, his unfaltering sense of the normal in the trivial affairs of every day, and his amused acceptance of the polite fatuities of the upper-class life of his time. Further glimpses of the unalterable Trollope may here and there be had. Speaking of competition among tradesmen, he declares that to overprice their wares is natural to mankind, who are only restrained by fear lest, quote, they be left with their goods or their knowledge unsold upon their hands, end quote. Who but Trollope would thus gleefully parallel the retailing activity of the shopkeeper with that of the man who has ideas to sell? Again, discussing the plumber, he draws irreverent analogy between this traditional artisan and a bishop, a lawyer, and a cabinet minister who are normally as anxious as any plumber to keep their jobs alive by leaving every day a little bit unfinished. Political compromise and a habitual forgetfulness of necessary tools are, he implies, two forms of the survival instinct. No wonder that Trollope had his enemies. One may not, with impunity, deride thus flippantly the hallowed pomposities of British social faith. The essay on the haberdasher raises several problems in contemporary psychology, in addition to that of the gradual supersession by the big store of the small, specialized shop. Feminine shopping technique as opposed to that of men, the relative efficiency of male and female shop assistants, the ideals of the at the time active Early Closing Association. Trollope was a strong supporter of the aims of this body and spoke in public on its behalf, and by implication the wider theme of women's rights. All are touched upon in these few pages of quick commentary, and in such a way as to reveal unmistakably the practical, pugnacious, but always warm-hearted convictions of the wise old man who wrote them. In conclusion, these essays may be recommended to students of social history, and in particular to such as enjoy a parallel between our modern preoccupations and those of earlier days. It is interesting to the 1920s to read in The Fishmonger and The Greengrocer the criticism of the central market system and of proposals 50 years ago to move Covent Garden to Russell Square, not to mention Northumberland Avenue and the Green Park. It reassures, or conversely flatters, our cynicism to know that blackmail was already being levied in 1880 by servants in big houses on tradesmen anxious for the householder's custom. Finally, prohibitionists and their opponents may profitably observe how enduring are the counterclaims of wets and dries, how sane and yet how difficult to emphasize was then, as now, the position of the moderate in this perpetual warfare. Trollope's discussion of the public house, which smites publican and pussyfoot alike, is unassailable for logic and for common sense. But confessedly it points no easy middle way. And why not? Surely because in all such matters of personal decency, individual taste rather than legislation must provide the standards of behavior. Trollope says, quote, there is no villainy to which education cannot reconcile us, end quote. And the converse is equally true, that there is no nobility to which the natural human soul may not aspire. Michael Sadleir. End of introduction.
Chapter 1 of London Tradesmen. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jennifer Beckett Wood. London Tradesmen by Anthony Trollope. The Tailor. Welcome, first of all, mine ancient friend, my tailor. For an ill-used person, he is as prosperous and as happy as any that I know. He is ill used, because there still remains a savour of the injustice done by him who first invented that calumny as to the 9th part of a man. There must have been a period, probably in the time of Henry VIII, in which the trade of tailoring earned this reproach. Feeble, the woman tailor whom Justice Shallow had selected for a soldier, is the representative 9th part indicated by that calumny. Latterly, tailors have become democratic and combative, and have now almost recovered their quiet, manly dignity, as a grocer may possess it, or a cheesemonger. There remains hardly a vestige of that sense of diminutiveness which used to possess us when we were called on to have an interview with this functionary. The London tailor is one with whom the resident in London has many interviews. A man may boast that he has nothing to do with his tailor but to accept his garments and pay his bill. You think that you can order your coat by letter, and you will be confident that it will suit you when sent home. But try back on your own memory, and you will find how often in the course of the last year you have stood at your tailor's board discussing with him things sartorial and others. He is in your way as you walk abroad, and though we are far from hinting that the tailor of your choice does not fit you as he should do, or that anything can be amiss either with his fabrics or with his patterns, there still will arise subjects of conversation sufficiently interesting to cause you to deviate as you go to your club. Perhaps it is the case that he is somewhat slow in the performance of his work. It is a fault with London tailors, and one in which, I fear, they love to indulge, as every such fault pleaded acts as an advertisement. The man who necessarily takes 6 weeks to make you a dress coat in the season must have many dress coats to make, and you have already perhaps found it to be your object to have your coat by him who makes many. Your tailor's intention is to amass a fortune. Yours in dealing with him is not only that of being clad. You too like a spark of that renown which may come to you from dealing with a tradesman of fashion. It is not that you wish to be great by means of your tailor. You are open to no such vile reproach. Clothes, you are quite aware, are but clothes. Let who will be made by his tailor, you are quite sure that the man who walks about in your raiments is not so formed. Nevertheless, your tailor is a fashionable tradesman, and a word or two now and then is very useful. As his shop does not lie far out of your way, it is probably the case that you find yourself frequently in his company. He is a good-looking, gentleman-like, middle-aged man, who, if you met him in the street without knowing him, might seem to belong, if not to your own club, at any rate to one like it. There is nothing cringing about him, and nothing arrogant. It is his peculiar property to be dressed neither in the fashion nor out of it. If called upon to decide, you would say that he was a gentleman. But were you to examine him closely, you would find in his features some trace of the retail tradesman. There would be to be discerned there those lines of little but still anxious thought which come from the daily making of money in small parcels. That passage from the De Officiis might occur to you, which tells us that they are to be accounted mean who buy from the wholesale dealers what they sell again. But the tailor who read your thoughts and knew his Cicero would probably rejoin, and declare that they only are declared mean by the philosopher from whom the work of their hands is purchased, and not the art which their brain has conceived. Alas! The nobility of art has not been there to lend its radiance. He deals exclusively with the outside of things, and they will not ennoble. But you like your tailor, though in truth you stand somewhat in awe of him. You talk to him about the outside of his business, but you hardly dare go to the point, which is sometimes almost painfully present to your own mind. You do not dare to tell him that he charges you too much, nor if you did would he accept it quietly, nor would he simply endeavour to convince you. Then there would come over his countenance that look of injury and of consequent anger, which we call indignation. It would still be so suppressed as to be made compatible with the usual tradesman's courtesy, but it would be conveyed in terms plain enough to make itself understood. And the expression when understood would mean simply this: if you are not satisfied with my prices, you can leave me as soon as you please. And then would come from him probably something intended to signify that if you were content to walk about with your legs enveloped in reach-me-downs, there were plenty of shops in the neighbourhood of Tottenham Court Road which would supply you at a price no doubt much lower than his. The words would be civil, but there would be so much of scorn in the man's intention as to make you feel that you must either leave him or beg his pardon. All this, indeed, has become so much a matter of course that you never do complain of his prices. You pay them, or leave them unpaid, as may be your practice, or else you quit the establishment. In all other respects, your tailor is a very pleasant man with whom to while away a quarter of an hour in chance conversation. You need not rush into literature, or politics, or religion. You may confine yourself entirely to his own wares, and in doing so need not make special reference to your own back or your own legs. You need not even allude to the excellence of the stuff he has furnished you. The general wants of the world at large in reference to garments, the general supply, and much more often the general deficiency, will find you in subjects. You will be astonished at the difficulties which your tailor has to encounter before the dapper little parcel is sent home which shall contain your trousers. There has been a sudden breakdown in the supply of the stuff demanded. The sheep have forgotten to give their wool. The different plants have declined to supply the dyes. The manufacturers, masters and men, have all declined to envelop further the legs of mankind. The intermediate merchants have, for certain inscrutable purposes of their own, suddenly abandoned their vocation. The journeyman tailors have struck work and are starving by tens of thousands about the country. The individual tailor who was to have made your very pair of trousers has been drunk since last Saturday week. You begin to fear that you will be reduced to the shreds and tatters of past ages. But your friend ends his catalogue by assuring you that he will be found sufficient for the occasion. You shall have them, sir, by the 15th of next month. It is now only the 10th of June, and you go on to your club a happy man. You will probably have observed, if you are an observant man, that your tailor in the pleasant lightness of his conversation has not scrupled to denounce the pecuniary ambition of other men. In describing the difficulties to be encountered in manufacturing a pair of trousers, he has pointed out with a little sneer the greed of the merchant who has sold the wool, of him who has made the cloth, and of the journeyman tailor who insists upon receiving fourpence halfpenny more upon each pair which passes through his hands. To your tailor, talking of these outsiders, it is as natural as it is to you that every man should get as much as he can, and should endeavour to get a little more. He does not exactly push his statements home to their just conclusions, but he does in fact assert that among all the farmers, merchants, and artificers concerned, he is the only just and honest man. And in his heart he thinks so. What is there in the world equal to a pair of well-fitting trousers? What sum can be too great to pay for such a coat as it is his study to make for you? Can money buy, except from him, such a pair of breeches as will be sent home from his breeches-making establishment? When his eyes revel in the appearance of a thoroughly well-got-up young man, we can imagine that he forgets all idea of payment, and is for a time contented to think that nature and fashion combined have supplied him with so excellent a moving block on which to show off his handiwork. And such in truth is very much the condition of his mind, though he will not have his prices questioned, and the walking man of fashion who shows off his work is never apt to question the price. He is not very apt to press for the payment of his bill. That question of getting in his money is altogether different from prices. There is none of that covered indignation because his account is long and of long standing. He will probably get it at last, with interest. He has certain measures intended for the getting in of such bills. If at last he do never get it, and it has to be written off as bad, still there have been precautions made for that. There will be a certain percentage of bad debts which must be scattered over the whole business. He must see that there be not above a certain number of bad debts. If they be kept within the percentage, he is not the loser. You, my friend, pay for them as part of the privilege you enjoy in going to a fashionable tailor's shop. I trust that you do not dislike the principle under which you are called upon to pay the debts of other men, or indeed that you are not one of those who take the other side of the bargain and are paid for. In the latter case your glory will be short-lived, and in the end your suffering will be great. But if your mind is tortured by the idea that you, Jones, are paying for the garments of Lord Augustus Montgomery, and if you are unwilling to incur such extravagance, you had better leave your tailor and accommodate yourself at the cooperative store. Touching the price of clothes generally, there are three objects to be regarded: fashion, comfort, and wear. As to the first, it may be worth nothing. There is, however, certainly a something of appearance to be attained by the cut of a well-trained West End tailor, which is immediately apparent to the eyes of those that are used to it. For the young it does much, but there may be a question whether it may not do more for the old. It requires education in the eyes of beholders for its efficacy as well as in the fingers of the artists. But, as a result, something is achieved which undoubtedly has its value in Pall Mall. The same clothes which are there becoming and reasonable produce ridicule if worn in distant rural retreats. For London men with London ideas it is indispensable and must be paid for. Comfort is surely valuable everywhere, but even in regard to comfort, that which is wearable in New Zealand would create unendurable annoyance in Piccadilly. The Sybarite is broken-hearted at the ruffling of a rose-leaf, not unreasonably, having been accustomed to have his rose-leaves smoothed for him. A crease in his coat will be to the ordinarily well-dressed Londoner as a ruffled rose-leaf, and will interfere materially with his comfort. In this respect also he must pay for his comfort. But if he have not trained himself to such self-indulgence, he may undoubtedly save £10 out of £40 by having himself measured at a cooperative store. On coming to the matter of wear, we touch a subject more tangible and more exact. On the one side there is the best broadcloth which the looms can produce, and on the other there is absolute shoddy. Now, I take permission to assert that shoddy is necessarily neither a lie nor a cheat. It is, as a rule, made as shoddy and sold as such by the makers. Some extra gloss is put upon it to deceive, not the eyes of the tailor, which in such a matter cannot be deceived, nor necessarily the eyes of his customers. It is the wearer of the shoddy who is anxious for a short period of bliss to look his best. He has his reward, and he pays his price. I do not say that no one buys a shoddy garment and pays a broadcloth's price for it. Such imposition is occasional in every trade, but as a rule those who wear shoddy pay for shoddy, finding it, no doubt, in the long run, of all wear, to be the most expensive, and those who wear superfine broadcloth pay for that article. In this respect I think that our friend the tailor is an honest man. I admit his airs and graces. I admit his fine-spun indignation. I acknowledge the passion for lucre which lies deep in his breast when he rebukes us for questioning his prices. I think that there might fairly be some reduction in the cost of our coats and waistcoats, so that he need not retire so early in life to the delights of his little place in the country. But I do maintain that he gives us the best article which money can purchase, and that he adapts it to our limbs as gracefully as their awkwardness will allow. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of London Tradesmen. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jennifer Beckett Wood. London Tradesmen by Anthony Trollope. The Chemist. But few of us, in making provisional arrangements for our annual expenditure, put down the chemist's bill as a necessary item, or expect to become intimately acquainted with that person in the course of our experience. Few, however, escape him, and as his charges appear before us at last as an unexpected extra, they are ungrateful, sometimes as having become so painfully necessary, and sometimes as representing nameless little requirements which seem to be redundant or almost fictitious. But the way to value a chemist's services is to live for a while beyond his reach. In London, his proximity is, perhaps, too close. Every fancied ailment sends your servant there, or your daughters, or your wife. You may soon find your house to be full of little bottles, with small jars crowding the bedroom tables. They do not come for nothing, as you discover at the end of the year. But live away from your chemist for a time, in the backwoods of Australia, let us say, and you will find how glad you would be to welcome him. It is painful, that bill for £15, with nothing to show for it but old scars, rheumatic twinges, and the memory of sick headaches. You have revelled in your beef and mutton. You still have the tailor's good things within your drawers. You have appreciated your wine merchant, and your plumber, whom I regard as the worst enemy of the human race, has served at least to keep the rain out. There is still a doubt in your bosom whether the chemist has really done anything for you. The contents of very few of the numerous little pots have been applied to your own body. It is on this account that the feelings of paterfamilias as to the exorbitant nature of his account have been so strong, and that we are reminded from time to time that the 1 shilling and 6pence which we have paid for the small bottles recently sent in has been charged at the rate of 500% on the original cost of the drug which has been used. Nevertheless, if there be a cheap chemist in the neighbourhood, you will hardly trust your stomach or those of your wife and offspring to his tender mercies. Having a regard to abstract justice, we should endeavour to ascertain what is the general result of a tradesman's career in his trade before we charge him or his brethren with exaction. Does the chemist make his fortune quicker than the butcher, or the tailor, or the publican? Or does he retire into grander or more luxurious ease? We think not. The publican is, we fancy, the man who arrives the soonest at that final desideratum of a fortune, though the nature of his business has been such that we doubt whether he enjoys it the longest. And next to him come the other two that I have named. The chemist is by no means prominent as a man who in early life and by rapid strides has made his way. If this be so, and if to his trade he take as much education, forethought, and intelligence as do the publican, the butcher, and the tailor, then the natural conclusion will be that he has not dealt exorbitantly with the public, although he may have charged 500% for the dose of rhubarb with which he has relieved your little boy in the time of the early apples. But as to his education, forethought, and intelligence, can there be any doubt about it? As to the nature of his education, we will say a word just now, but consider a while the extent of the knowledge required by the publican and the chemist. Of the former we may say that the less he knows of the science of mixing, the better for his customers. To retail his beer as he gets it from the brewer, or his gin from the distiller, is his duty, if he only would do it. Almost without fear as to the consequences of adulteration, he pursues his practices. Down in those dark vaults to which we see the barrels consigned by the burly men of Truman, Hanbury, and Buxton, or Barclay and Perkins, the liquor is prepared for the drinker with a rough hand, and none is the wiser. certainly not the poor recipient. But the chemist? What latitude in mixing is allowed to him? There can be no rough hand there, no cellar work, no deeds of darkness. The poor woman goes into the publican's house and comes out drunk. No inquiry is made as to the nature of her intoxication. Drunk she is, and drunk she has made herself, and she is carried away on the constable's stretcher to the nearest police station. But if anything wrong has happened in the chemist's mixings, he will never hear the end of it. One mistake as to 2 drops out of a wrong bottle, made by an assistant, will ruin a man for ever. And yet complaints are made about his charges. No doubt a chemist may make overcharges. No doubt he will make overcharges, unless restrained by competition. It is the nature of a tradesman, I was about to say, but it is in the nature of all mankind to make such overcharges with a clear conscience, unless they be prevented by the fear that they will be left with their goods or their knowledge unsold upon their hands. Ascending into higher regions, may we not say that the same thing takes place even with the barrister's work? Sir John and Sir Henry, having got to the top of their tree, may charge nearly what they please. The same may be done in almost every profession and trade, more than in the chemist's. But as to the ordinary run of legal assistance, Mr. James is made reasonable by the proximity of Mr. Smith, so it is in other trades. The chemist is governed by the same law, and will soon mix his lotions in vain unless he conform himself to the prices usual in the neighbouring streets. In fact, there is a scale for such prices recognised among chemists, though upheld by no law, and in accordance with this they have to do their daily work. Pills, though not unfrequent in family use, are not as common as mutton chops, and the exact price at which they may be purchased is not known to all housekeepers. But among the chemists themselves the rule is preserved. We take it that one chemist examining another chemist's bill would be able to declare at a moment's notice whether the articles have been overcharged. We may be sure that one chemist does often see another chemist's bill, and that, therefore, such overcharges are unusual. It may be that the man is no more honest than his neighbours, but he is subject to the same restraints, and bound by good behaviour by the same laws of living. When we hear of the tale of 500% demanded for drugs, we should consider the circumstances under which the drugs are administered. There is a story told of a passionate old Spanish artist named Alonso Cano. He had lived many years, which he had devoted to his art, and was passionate as well as old. A judge came to him one day and gave him an order for a figure in little of his patron saint. Cano made a beautiful statuette and charged the judge 100 doubloons. 100 doubloons, said the judge, for work that has occupied you less than 20 days? And I, chancery judge as I am, only receive 1 poor doubloon a day for my services. 20 days, said Cano, dashing the statue to pieces at the judge's feet. It has taken me 50 years of unintermittent study to learn to make that figure. The frightened judge left the artist's workshop as quickly as he could, for Alonso Cano was a rough man in his wrath, and was said to have murdered his wife. When we hear of chemists' charges being held up to reproach on the 500% computation, we always think of Alonso Cano and the broken figure of the patron saint. We doubt very much whether a chemist's trade is peculiarly profitable. There are well-known instances of men or firms which have made large fortunes, but we suspect that this has been done by a peculiar knowledge in the science of drugs, by something in which scientific research has been combined with the retailing of physic. And in these cases, a peculiar happiness, something which may be called luck, has been combined with research, so that after many years a man's name has been brought to the front, and other chemists have found it to be their interest to deal with him. and capital has joined itself to knowledge, till those elements of success have been brought together which always reach large pecuniary results. But taking the numerous chemists' shops which we see from street to street, we believe that modest comfort is more often attained than great wealth. The labour of the shop is continuous, and hard labour has to be paid for. We doubt whether the first idea in the minds of many as they walk the streets on Sunday is not one as to the good fortune of the chemist who can make his money 7 days in the week. The chemist's assistant looks at his own lot in life in a different light, and thinks that he ought to be paid for his constant attendance. For him there is no early closing on Saturday, the bowels of men and women being subject to no mercy. All this must be considered in the remuneration paid to him. And then there is his knowledge. The simplest apothecary's boy must have some training, and before he arrives at the mystery of mixing, should have had much. Public opinion is a weapon terribly strong. One wrong grain thrown into a pill, as we said before, will send the father of a family out into the desert a ruined man. Consequently, a chemist does pay his assistant more highly than another tradesman. We are told that the common expense of an assistant in a chemist's shop is about £200 a year, which is much higher than is generally paid in other retail trades. But for the chemist himself, the education necessary is not only long and expensive, but is looked after by the government itself in a manner quite unusual in other trades. For the butcher, the baker, and the publican, no such care is necessary. They may teach themselves as much or as little as they may choose to learn, and if the teaching be not satisfactory, they must settle that themselves with their customers. But with a chemist, the matter is conducted in quite a different form. We think that we hardly exaggerate when we say that a man may become a barrister without much necessary qualification. He may become a barrister and be quite unfit to do a barrister's work, that work being of a nature which the government can leave to be arranged between the lawyer and the litigant without danger to the lives of either. But it has been felt that the vendors of drugs must not be allowed to poison their neighbours, and therefore no man can now open his shop as a chemist without having proved himself fit to do so as regards the education demanded of him. First of all, he undergoes what we may call general school teaching, which includes, we believe, always the Latin language, and he does that so as to pass, or be plucked for, an examination. He then has to undergo 2 various examinations in chemistry before examiners appointed by the Pharmaceutical Society. On passing the first, he is entitled to call himself a chemist and druggist. On passing the second, he becomes, or may become, a pharmaceutical chemist and druggist. What is the difference? We must confess that we have been unable to learn. They can both sell physic, and neither of them is empowered to practice medicine. We can only suppose that the pharmaceutical chemist is the more learned pundit of the two, and therefore entitled to a wider faith. It is not the case that he has any other advantage in his trade. Now we do maintain that a man so trained to follow a learned profession, or at any rate a scientific pursuit, if the word profession gives offence, should not be regarded as one bound to sell his goods at any peculiar percentage of profit. It is not in fact the goods he sells, but the goods so arranged as to preserve instead of injuring life. We must add a word or two as to the chemist personally. He is a tradesman, otherwise he would have no locus standi in our columns. At the first blush of the thing, it may seem that we are flattering him in calling him a gentleman, but with the chemist, as with all men, education will show itself. Our readers remember that there is still an idea in the British mind averse to retail dealing, which begrudges that comfortable name to him who stands behind a counter. But our readers will remember also the old adage, ingenuus didici fideliter artes, emollit mores, nec sinit esse feros. The art of medicine, though acquired merely with the object of retailing it, is ingenuous and leaves its good results. The consequence is that the chemist, as we have found him, is always a man with whom it is pleasant to spend a half hour in free conversation. End of chapter 2.
Section 3 of London Tradesmen. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by John Brandon. London Tradesmen by Anthony Trollope. The Butcher. The butcher is certainly not the most popular of the numerous men of business with whom we are forced to have mercantile dealings. He is not popular because he is brought into close contact with meat, which, much as we wish it for our daily use and indulgence, we do not desire even to see it in its uncooked form. He is not popular because he kills the poor sheep, whom we only desire to eat, and he is not popular because he is generally ruddy, obese, and jovial amidst his sanguinary pursuits. For these reasons we avoid the butcher, and rather despise him. At any rate, the more delicate among us do so. But there is no tradesman upon whom we depend so much for our daily comfort, or in regard to whom it is so vitally important to us that he should thoroughly understand his business. He cannot absolutely poison us, as the chemist may by his ignorance, or make us ridiculous to those around us as the tailor may do. But a good leg of mutton, how noble a thing it is, and how far removed from that coarse, hardly eatable viand, which is tallowy, woolly, and stringy. To the butcher who knows his trade it is given to perceive at a glance the nature of the article of which he is in search, whether it be juicy, sweet, and high-flavored, or woolly, tough, and redolent as tallow, as is the nature of some sheep. This is a great gift, but it may be shared by your cook. She, too, may know good meat when she sees it, and may, if possessed by stronger virtues than are often found in a cook's bosom, refuse to accept a faulty joint on behalf of her master's taste. But the butcher must also know where he may habitually buy that which is good, and must dare to lay out his money accordingly. The temptations to him to purchase that which is inferior are very strong. His profit upon it is more than double, if he sell to you as meat of the first class that which is inferior. You, my public, I presume to be in blissful ignorance on the subject, till your food appears before you on your table. But no sooner has the carving knife done its work than a suspicion of the truth rushes upon your mind. Your brow becomes clouded. Your hopes of coming joy are at once extinguished, and you exclaim to the partner of your misery that that fellow Jones has again sent you a leg of mutton that is not worth a straw. When you complain to your butcher on the following morning, and with pathetic but subdued moanings describe to him the nature of the woe which he has inflicted on you, he assumes a condoling air of reciprocal sorrow, and assures you that he is altogether in ignorance of the cause. He perhaps assures you that he himself with his family ate the fellow leg, and found nothing amiss. There must have been some singular error. He is not like the tailor, who tells you boldly to your face that his cloth is good cloth. He is more humble, more apologetic, more sorrowing. But he never quite admits the fault. We, in our experience, have never known a butcher own to having sent home bad meat. But we never knew a butcher who has not seemed to admit that it might have been possible. Our conviction has always been that the man has remembered well the exact nature of the meat in question, so much so as to make us marvel at his memory in regard to that very leg among so many legs. He has always received our criticism as though applied to a joint which was specially within his knowledge, and we have generally found that our observations have been efficacious, save for a month or 6 weeks, that during that time the meat has been good and succulent, such as we like to bestow upon a friend. Then comes the deleterious leg of mutton again, and another visit becomes necessary. So we go on through the year, and from year to year, and we regard our butcher as a good tradesman, worthy of support, as excellent, in fact, as a race of meat-eating men have a right to expect. But we have always been certain that he has been aware of that special lapse, and has not been able to resist the temptation to make that special profit. Whether he could not get enough good meat on that day, or the assistant buyer had been deceived in his judgment, or he had bought it wilfully, making up his day's lot with a cheap bargain, we have not pretended to know. But it is hard indeed on him if he may not try any customer once in 6 weeks, making an extra profit of penny and a halfpenny a pound. We have argued with him, and have never carried our complaint beyond the one little interview. But if that complaint were never made, there would have been more than one bad joint of meat in 6 weeks. In the old days, when Smithfield was Smithfield, and when we were young, butchers were butchers, and used to kill their own meat. Now the bulk of that which is eaten in London comes up daily by meat trains to London, instead of being brought from the feeding ground in the shape of living animals. The advantage of this to all London is considerable, and to the country as far as the ownership of the cattle is concerned. In dealing with the London tradesman, it is not necessary for us to refer to the miseries of the old journey. But one result of the old change is that the butcher is hardly a butcher any longer. Our tender hearts should not be revolted by this special horror of the slaughter, any more than when we buy a tongue at Fortnum and Mason's. Who does kill the meat? We, being Londoners, are not prepared to say. Our first acquaintance with it is made on its entrance into the modern market at Smithfield, where the butcher attends to buy it, or sends those who perform that important duty for him. We would recommend those who are anxious in observing how the wants of a great city are supplied to go themselves to Smithfield some morning at 8 o'clock, and see the babel of blood-stained confusion from which their beefsteak is to be extracted and brought quietly to their hall door. There are 4 millions of us to be fed, 4 millions of us, most of whom are meat-eating animals. There, as he looks at the scene before him with amazed interest, let him reflect what the 4 millions would do for their food if by any sudden caprice of nature the railways were made unable to carry their daily loads. With our butcher we have one occasion for constant quarrelling, as to which he indeed is, we believe, more sinned against than sinning. If all the butchers in London could rise up and put their shoulders to the wheel, and strenuously exert themselves to reform the evil, no doubt they would save London from a great infliction. But such combined exertion as that is too much to expect from any body of men. They permit the cooks to levy a tax upon their masters, varying from 2.5 to 5%. The sum of money thus dishonestly raised in London is enormous. It will be in the memory of our readers that the Duke of Sutherland some time since declared his purpose of stamping out the evil as far as his own household was concerned, hoping that by the example he would set, he might put an end to the general evil. What success has attended the Duke's efforts as to his own family we do not know, or whether he has so continued his attempt as to free himself from the exaction. His intention was to do a general benefit to London at large, but we are assured that the effort has not answered his expectation. We remember how the ostler was taught by the priest to grease the horse's teeth, so that he could not eat the oats. The Duke, with the others who were loud upon the subject, told the secret to many who till then had never heard it. Before that day the cooks at large establishments made their demands and enforced obedience. But since then every cook has learned the strength of her position, and will not allow her master to deal with any butcher except on receipt of the tax as above named. But why not make the master responsible for the payment of this tax, and not the butcher? Our reader will say, as the evil is in fact bribery of the worst description, as the custom is rotten all round, dishonest as against the master, and showing a combination of dishonesty in the cook and the butcher. Why not throw on the master the burden of correcting the evil? Let every master do as the Duke intended. Let him call upon his butcher to assist him against the real culprit. The butcher would assist him. If he dared, will assist him as far as he dares. The butcher may lose something, but can gain nothing by the practice except the master's custom. But he would not long be employed, except by masters who have their minds sufficiently at leisure to be able to devote their thoughts almost exclusively to their meat. The master does, in fact, excuse the evil, blink at it, and ignore it, finding it easier to pay his percentage than to carry on a long and perhaps losing fight with his household and his tradesmen. We have been assured that a persistent cook will prick her sirloin of beef, and produce it to the table in a most unpalatable guise, if left without her perquisite. If the tradesmen would combine, they could remedy the evil better than can any single duke, let him be ever so philanthropic and ever so generous. As to the cost of meat, we have said nothing. The world considers it to be very high. Butchers undoubtedly do make their money with a rapidity unknown in other trades, except in that of the publican. On the other hand, it is very hard to start a butcher's trade. The number of incipient butchers who begin with a little money and lose it all, seeking in vain to enter in upon the paradise of butchers, is larger than in other trades. Whether the public give more than fair compensation to them, we are not prepared to say. Whether it be so or not, we do not think that they are in the way to get their meat much cheaper on that account. End of chapter 3. Section 4 of London Tradesmen. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by John Brandon. London Tradesmen by Anthony Trollope. The Plumber. The plumber, painter, and glazier of our youth has disappeared, and in lieu of him has come up the man who mends our kitchen furniture and destroys our roofs. Such at least is the reputation which our friend the plumber enjoys. We do not say that of our own knowledge. It is deserved. We do not profess to declare that he plans the perforation of our leads. We cannot so far condemn the man who continually haunts our premises, and whose half-yearly bill is of all our torments the most regular, bearing a proportion to our rent, which we should have regarded as formidable had we anticipated the necessity of these periodical visits. The plumber should be put down with the tax-gatherer, as being as certain as fate, and as inexorable, almost as serious. You shall put your house into excellent order, and think to have seen the last of him for years, but he will be there again till the sight of him is a perpetual eyesore to you. You will come to have an unnatural hatred for the man and his myrmidons. He leaves nothing behind for you to eat, as does the butcher, nothing to wear, as does the tailor, nothing to delight you, nothing, finally, in which you may exult among your acquaintance. Who ever spoke among his friends of his plumber, or boasted of his intimacy with that dark, silent, seemingly sullen man, who comes so frequently, and on his coming has nothing to say for himself? The plumber is doubtless aware that he is odious. He feels himself like Dickens' turnpike man, to be the enemy of mankind. He has probably a wife at home, and pretty children whom he fondles, but you, as you look at him, believe him to be alone in the world, and fancy him to be a man unblessed. How can one so saturnine press a wife to his bosom, or participate in the infantine gambols of children? Meet him in the street, and he does not, as your baker does, meet your eye with a half-ready and half-humble smile of acknowledgment. He walks by in silence, apparently engaged as to his thoughts in plotting some infernal hole among the roofs, or arranging for a future catastrophe with the water pipes. You pass on, taking no heed of the obdurate sinner, but you turn him and his deeds over in your mind, and thank the Lord that in arranging for you your lot in life, he did not make you a plumber. We are far from saying that such is the true character of the man. We remember in a romance the story of one who was presumed to have made himself abominable to all his fellow creatures. He was an executioner, and as such lived a miserable, a solitary, and a despised life. But he was in truth the general benefactor of the human race, and spent his whole time in doing magnificent deeds as to which he was content that the whole world should be ignorant of their existence. The nature of the mystery need not be explained here, but such was the fate of this hero. We have sometimes thought how possible it may be that our plumber is like the executioner, only that his mystery may be more easily solved. Can it be that he is really engaged in mending, according to the just rules of his trade, those leakages among the leads, in conquering those fugitive smells, in stopping those pernicious runnings of water, in reducing to order those rebellious bells, in ridding our rooms of the smoke that will not fly upwards, and that he does all this to the best of his ability, with true workmanlike assiduity and conscience. And he must be aware at the time of what the world is saying of him. That he is aware, we are very certain. His looks betray him. We are perfectly sure that he knows the doom that has been pronounced against him. There is something in his gait, in his manner, in his sullen indifference to all remonstrance, which assures us that it is so. He cannot have been about our house so often, and have known so little of us, have been so little intimate with us, or with our servants, have smiled so seldom, nay, never, had he not been the malevolent influence as which the world regards him, or else that hero of romance, that unknown, mistaken, long-suffering, patriotic man, whom the world has conspired to condemn, but who knows himself to be pure. On this subject we ourselves offer no opinion. We take the man simply as we find him, and leave the doubt to be decided according to the various idiosyncrasies of our readers. The man, though he be an angel of light, is undoubtedly a pest about our house, and as far as our observation goes, the nearer to your street is that in which he lives, the greater and more frequent becomes the annoyance. If perchance you live in the country, far removed from the resort of plumbers, where molten lead is a thing almost unknown, you should hardly hear of him, and yet you live. You are neither killed by the smells, nor drowned by the water, nor destroyed by the weather. If once in 3 years a man pays you a visit from the neighboring town, 6 or 7 miles distant, he does what he has to do at one coming, and then departs. There is no time for him to leave an impression on your mind that he is your especial enemy. But in London he is to you as the skeleton in the cupboard, as the invisible guest who is present at all your feasts. Needless to deny that the normal London plumber is a dishonest man. We do not even allow ourselves to think so. That question as to the dishonesty of mankind generally is one that disturbs us greatly. Whether a man in all grades of life will by degrees train his honesty to suit his own book, so that the course of life which he shall bring himself to regard as soundly honest shall, if known to his neighbors, subject him to their reproof. We own to a doubt whether the honesty of a bishop would shine bright as the morning star to the submissive ladies who now worship him, if the theory of life upon which he lives were understood by them in all its bearings. The Prime Minister with his cabinet of compromising men would hardly do so to the eager politician who has welcomed him at the hustings, but who has himself never been called upon to compromise. And what of the honesty of the barrister, with his high feelings and noble sentiments in private life, whom we do not here condemn for taking a fee which he cannot earn, but who at any rate holds forth a brilliant example to men below him as to earning money, of which the men below him will not be slow to avail themselves? Are we to expect much in the way of true honesty from the poor plumber, who has to live, and who thinks it to be the first duty of mankind to do so, his first duty to take care that his wife and children shall have the means of living, when it comes in this way to make a complete job among your water pipes, a job so complete that neither he nor any of his confraternity shall be wanted there for the next 5 years, is he to be expected to make that job perfect, or to look forward for his wife and children, and perceive that for their sake, and for the sake of trade in general, by which he means the welfare of the wife and children of other plumbers, he is bound to see that due preparation may be made for another coming, as the barrister and the cabinet minister and the bishop think that they are per se blessings of which a people and a country can hardly have too much, and can hardly know too little as to their methods of work. Why should it not also be so with our friend the plumber? Is it altogether impossible that he, too, should have taught himself to think that a household can never be happy unless he be tapping with his hammer among the leads? He makes work for himself, says paterfamilias angrily. He absolutely prepares the hole which shall be perforated through by the next storm. He purposely arranges that within 3 months not a bell again shall ring in the house. He is determined that at periodical intervals you shall be a Sinbad to him as he sits upon your shoulders. Then, muttering loud and deep, he pays the unexpected bill. On the next morning, being by profession a respectable solicitor, he is hard at work at Lincoln's Inn, paving the way for fresh litigation. It is very hard to fight the plumber's battles for him. So notorious are his defalcations, and so destructive of our comfort. It becomes a question to us whether it be possible that a plumber should go to heaven. But on thinking over all the conditions of his circumstances, reflecting that the question will have to be settled by an unerring judgment, we do not see why he should be debarred if barristers and cabinet ministers be allowed to enter. Sound undeviating honesty, totus terris atque rotundus, is, as far as we can see, to be found exclusively among writers for the press. But men will surely be admitted on the score of faith, if on no other, even if they die among their lapses. But for the plumber we earnestly recommend our readers to keep as far as possible beyond his reach, and to submit rather to all the ills of the Arctic and torrid zones than to have their patience troubled by the coming of that much-hated individual. End of chapter 4. Section 5 of London Tradesmen. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by John Brandon. London Tradesmen by Anthony Trollope. The Horse Dealer. The horse dealer is an unfortunate man in being subject to the evil thoughts of all mankind. He is reputed, but wrongly reputed, to be by his trade little better than a swindler. Whatever may have been his vices in this respect a century or even a half a century since, circumstances have changed his character, so that the world wrongs him. There has been, no doubt, for many years something in the traffic of horses provocative of deceit and cheating. This is so thoroughly the case that the would-be purchaser expects it, not without some slight comfort in the feeling that time will bring round for him also the day for selling, when he too may conceal a vice or two, and bring into more glaring light any virtues his beast may possess. For in every man who owns a horse you see a possible, though perhaps an unprofessional, horse dealer. A man does not sell his wine or his books, or even his furniture, often in his life, and when he does so, it is in such a manner that he has no voice in the fixing of their price. They go to the auctioneer, and the vendor religiously stays away, leaving his fate to competition, and knowing nothing of what fortune may have done for him till the final result be communicated. His horses he may sell after the same fashion. The beasts which pass from hand to hand at Tattersall's or Aldridge's are very many, and men who understand the ways of those marts may sell well there, and may buy well. But the stray man who has a stray beast with which to part is apt to find a private purchaser if he can. Of such dealings we can only say that, as a rule, we are afraid to trust to them. We, too, have been cheated in horseflesh, but it has chiefly been in those private dealings. We could tell an amazing story as to a magnificent hunter, the pet of a great establishment, a little too much for the owner's riding and therefore to be sold, and which, having come to our stables, was found to be not worth a shilling. But we abstain from minute record of our own misfortunes, merely remembering that we could never bring ourselves to understand the state of mind of the wealthy gentleman who made the sale. All is fair in horse dealing would probably have been his argument. I get a stick and I give one. There are many who can satisfy their conscience with this argument. To us it seems to be an evil thing for the world at large that such a one should be able to hold up his head among his fellows. But we take it to be a mistake to imagine that the professional horse dealer carries on his pursuit after this fashion. Were he to do so, he would soon cease to be a professional horse dealer. The gentleman, when he has robbed you of your money, has a great object. He has got rid of a worthless brute, which he could not very well kill, and which nobody would take from him if he told the truth about him. He has had his triumph, but the horse dealer cannot afford to be triumphant after that fashion. He does not live by the selling of one horse, but by the selling of many, and no man can continue to sell worthless brutes. Among tradesmen with whom we are acquainted, the horse dealer, we should say, is second to none for honesty, compelled to follow this virtue by the peculiar difficulties of his situation. Trade, as a rule, consists in purchasing among the breeders of the country animals for town use, and for the use of gentlemen in the country who prefer to buy their horses in London. The trade in this way is extensive, for if you investigate the facts as to any large hunting establishment, or as to the stables of noblemen or gentlemen at their country residences, you will find that many of the horses have come from London dealers. They have, however, all been bred in the country. The dealer has a large acquaintance amidst breeders and farmers, and knows also the characters of various provincial fairs. He makes his rounds and selects his animals, often unfortunately for his customers, and at a great loss to himself, often, on the other hand, with infinite skill. It will be perceived at a glance how subject to perils is the trade, which depends altogether on exact knowledge of form, breeding, and signs of health, and is absolutely without any standard of value. Wheat and broadcloth and iron and leather are all governed by such standards. The dealer buying his colt from a farmer has nothing to guide him beyond his own judgment and the farmer's word. In the fair the vendor is probably a stranger, and the dealer has nothing but his own eyes. He buys the best he can, and sells again rapidly, believing the beast still to be the best for which he bought him. Or if during the short period of his acquaintance with the horse in question some disagreeable truth has made itself known, that disagreeable truth will immediately take the shape of a depreciation of the price to be asked. It will suit him better to lose £20 on the sale of the animal than to disturb the confidence of his customer, and to have it said about London that he has sold a horse with a fictitious character. The instances in which dealers are thus obliged to put up with premeditated and arranged loss are very numerous. On such occasions he will tell something of the fault, enough to make him feel that he is still dealing honestly, more perhaps, O reader, than would suit your idea of honesty had you the beast to sell. You have some suspicion about the horse's eye, which makes you think that the day may come in which he will not see as well as he ought to do. It is but the dread of what possibly may happen. If you tell the intended purchaser the exact state of your own mind, he will at once reject the horse as going blind. He will not buy him at a price reduced in consequence of a possible fault. In fact, he will not believe you. He shies a little, you say. I don't think it's his eyes, but it may be. Thus you satisfy your conscience. You have put your customer on his guard in the proper direction, and yet if the horse should go blind, no one can say but that you have done your duty like an honest man. In order not to deceive, you must accommodate your statements, not to the ordinary condition of the purchaser's mind, but to that which comes upon him when he is about to make a purchase. The article you are to sell you never describe as bad. Middling is the lowest word of abasement to which a seller ever descends in describing his own goods. That is probably your mode of selling your horse, you being an honest man. It may be that you are such as was my rich friend with his pet hunter. In that case you stick at nothing. Caveat emptor. But our friend the horse-dealer must be more on his guard, not only than my rich friend, but also than you who are indifferently honest. It does not often happen to him to buy a horse with doubtful eyes. He has his judgment, and if necessary his vet, to guard him. But if he have such a one in his possession, he does not dare to sell him as a sound horse. It is better for him to tell even more than the truth, than to let the animal go from him with a false character. Such are the theories as to the trait upon which the horse-dealer at present acts. There must be now and again an exception. A horse-dealer will cheat, and will find himself subject to a lawsuit in consequence. We see such cases in the newspapers and wonder perhaps at the softness of the purchaser. It is the horse-dealer, however, who has to avoid the exhibition. 3 or 4 such misfortunes will go far to ruin a man. In buying, the purchaser may always protect himself by the opinion of a veterinary surgeon, which may be had for half a guinea. No doubt a veterinary surgeon may discover faults, as to which it would be much better that the purchaser should know nothing. Why, you should think yourself entitled, with the possession of simply moderate means, to be the owner of a perfect horse, whereas in the matter of a wife you have put up with certain known imperfections you have probably never asked yourself. Our advice to you is in making your purchase to be not overly particular. Ascertain the character of some dealer whom you may trust, and then tell the man what you want, what you can afford to pay for it, and promise him ready money. We in time have bought many horses, and have found this the safest and readiest mode of proceeding. An assurance given to the dealer that he will absolutely receive his money when the deal is completed will generally result in a diminution of 20% on the sum to be charged. Men buy horses which they cannot afford to ride, and dealers not unfrequently have to pay for them. Always make your purchase without the intervention of your groom or coachman. The sums asked by servants on such occasions are out of proportion even to those exacted by the exorbitance of your cook. £10 apiece for a pair of coach horses is not an unfrequent demand. A horse dealer the other day told us how he had failed to complete the sale of a pair of coach horses to an old lady. The old lady had been told of the horses, and had written to him about them. He named his price, and the lady sent her coachman. The man demanded £20. The dealer offered £10, and the bargain was broken off. "Why not," said we, "go to the lady and explain to her the whole nature of the transaction?" "Not if I know it," said the dealer. "The money I should make would not be worth the trouble. The coachman is an old friend, and would be believed. I am only a new one, and should not stand a chance. She must pay for her own folly, and put up with an inferior pair of horses." End of chapter 5.
Section 6 of London Tradesmen. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Beeswax Candle. London Tradesmen by Anthony Trollope. The Publican. Among London tradesmen there is none of whom we see so little as of the publican. Of him as publican we know nothing, conjecturing him to be the inside, unseen guardian angel of that palace which stands always open at the corner of the street in which we reside. But there is none with whom we have a nearer concern, certainly on the part of our neighbours, probably on that of our servants, and perhaps on our own. What a godsend it would be to have a decent, honest publican at our elbow, a man who would not adulterate his liquors, and would keep order in his house. As to that matter of order, we must begin by stating that the publican himself is as desirous of maintaining it as can be any of those who are in his neighbourhood. We believe that there is in these days hardly a publican in London who thinks that he can best do his business, that is, make his fortune, by keeping a flash house in which men should be allowed to get drunk, to do as they please, and to be rowdy. No man hates drunkenness so much as the publican. What he desires are customers who can drink and not get drunk. With customers who drink and get drunk he has to put up, that they should yield to intoxication as their weakness, and not their virtue. It is an evil which in the way of his trade he must endure. Hard-headed lovers of beer, or patrons of the gin-tub, who will show their orgies in their noses, or their feet, or even in their stomachs, without noisy perturbation, are not to be had. The drinker quickly becomes a drunkard. Luckily for himself, perhaps, as otherwise his nose or his feet or his stomach will give way and fail him utterly. Against all charity, as to his customers, the publican must harden his heart utterly. Alas, the human heart, even the female human heart, will soon become hard as granite when the pocket requires the sacrifice. Not from any feeling for the men and women who frequent his bar does the publican require order, but from the acknowledged fact that order pays and disorder never does. The enterprising commercial gentleman, who lately was compelled to shut up the Argyle rooms with so many screams as to the injustice of the magistrates, would willingly have kept an orderly house of entertainment had the circumstances of the place permitted it. His object was to induce the decent people to come to him, not the indecent. Order has more money in its pocket than disorder. Order creates no breakages. Order continues longer, not destroying itself quickly. Order can be attended to cheaply. Order has not to be turned bodily out of doors with its dangerous expenditure of bodily strength. Shall we wrong the publican if we say that he wishes to serve God and Mammon, and that he is anxious to drive a roaring trade with all the decorum of a conventicle? In this our neighbour the publican is at one with us. But he has to fight a hard battle. He cannot shut his door against the two rapid drunkards, even if he knew them. Even though he be himself not free and easy, he must have the reputation of a free and easy man. Nor can he refuse to serve those whose very presence is a disgrace to his house. Could a publican live who would refuse drink at his bar to all females? A world of thirsty women would cry him down, and another world of women, not thirsty in the least, would crush him under their clamour as to women's rights. And yet, with a female drinking gin in his house, with a female behaving as females who do drink gin, what publican can hope any longer for real decency? The horror of the thing must die out from his mind altogether, leaving only that wish for the appearance of decency which accompanies the desire to make a fortune rapidly. In regard to that question of adulteration, many thoughts cross our minds. I fear we must take it as granted that the normal publican does adulterate his liquors. As far as the moral of the practice goes, He does that which the chemist would do were he to sell cheap poison in lieu of a salutary but costly drug. He knows well that the mixture which he thus concocts is more destructive, more readily injurious, more damnable than that which he pretends to sell. But he does it in order that he may make his fortune more rapidly. We hardly know how any man can be guilty of greater commercial sin, but no doubt he excuses the practice to his own mind till his conscience, accustomed to the thought, requires excuse no longer. He has perhaps been brought up to the trade from his early youth, and in this way we can find the readiest pardon for him. There is no villainy to which education cannot reconcile us. Or he tells himself when he succeeds to a business or purchases in later life that he is only doing that which is done by hundreds, and he uses for his own support and comfort that most pernicious of all commercial phrases, the custom of the trade. There is no dishonesty, no robbery to which a man cannot be taught to reconcile himself by that phraseology. When once he has found the excuse by which to salve the qualms of his conscience, he can use it ever afterwards with increasing strength till he has created for himself a gospel in which he believes as firmly as any Christian in his Bible. Custom of the trade. Then, without further qualms, he mixes quassia with his porter and vitriol with his gin. Sir Wilfrid Lawson and the teetotalers form in these days a strong body, of whom the present writer believes their tenets to be impracticable, and their theory of virtue erroneous. Grant a thing to be agreeable and cheap, and you cannot expel it by Act of Parliament. Nor is a thing in itself bad because it may lead to evil results. We need only refer to the details of another still more hideous trade in support of our argument. The bear, too, knew that the flies disturbed the rest of his sleeping friend, the man, and thereupon dashed the man's brains out with a brickbat in an attempt to kill the fly. Sir Wilfrid, in his virtuous zeal, is doing as the bear did. But of beer that is not beer, indeed of any adulterated compound, the law is able to take recognizance. The time will surely come when the publican shall be compelled to sell the goods which he gets from the brewer and the distiller, and the more easily so because he is not supposed to manufacture his article, as does the baker. He pretends to be simply a retailer of his goods. Alas, he is too frequently a manufacturer. It is the object of all retail tradesmen to retire quickly from a business which is monotonous, for the most part uninteresting, and wearisome. But it is especially the object of the publican. He will excuse himself for his haste on the plea that his business exacts so much from him as to demand early relaxation. That business of making people drunk, and then of making them behave as though they were sober, requires from a man a perpetual exercise of strength and prudence, by which he is soon wearied. Let my reader, if he has never yet done so, look into a gin shop at the evening hours when the business is at its full, and say how he would like to pass many years of his life in ruling such an establishment. An early retirement to the paradise of a fortune made is the only possible compensation, and therefore it has to be hurried on. We have spoken of the hardness of heart towards his customers by which the publican is ordinarily distinguished. As far as he can see the effects of his own trade, he does nothing but evil, and the evil which he does is only too palpable, too clearly visible to him. He must see the man ruining himself, and must lend him his ready help. Worse again, he must witness the frightful degradation of women perfected through his means, and must always be willing to assist. Even children he cannot spare. Their pence will add something to his might. In this way his heart does become hard as the nether millstone. You shall wonder as you watch the unperturbed face of himself and his assistants that the milk of human kindness should be so absolutely drawn away from human bosoms. But we have observed with these men that when the fortune has been made, and when the retirement has come, they seem to return to their old habits of humanity. The publican falls back into the normal condition of manhood, good or bad, as he was before, and it seems as though those dozen years of his trade life have been passed in another world. And so indeed they were. You shall find him saying his prayers in his parish church, and probably collecting alms as the church warden. He'll be kind to his wife, tender to his children, and merciful to his servants. When he looks back at the sad hours he passed in that house at the corner of the street, he consoles himself by saying that the custom of the trade was responsible for it all. We must add that of all politicians the publican is the worst. He admits that he would have a House of Commons to pass laws for his benefit, and would have no one there who would oppose his creed. He thinks that, during his period of trade, the world should be so handled as to further his object. In London, during these last elections, he has had a great downfall, but the impudence of his pretensions is so memorable as to make a word on the subject necessary. End of section 6.
Section 7 of London Tradesmen. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. London Tradesmen by Anthony Trollope. The Fishmonger. But little thought is given by Londoners generally to the trouble necessary to be taken before their dinner tables or even their breakfast tables can be spread for them. The ordinary inhabitant of the West End, whose business lies in the law courts, or in office, or in Parliament, or they who have no business at all, think that kidneys and fresh fish, salad and green peas, are rained upon them from heaven, at a certain price per pound or per quart, and are well aware that so long as they can pay the bills the articles will come. We almost fear that the articles will cease to come unless steps be taken by the municipalities to make the accommodation afforded more fitting to the numbers to be supplied. It is not that the supply will run short, especially not the supply of fish or vegetables, of which tons are said to be daily wasted, but that the approaches, the conduits through which they all have to pass before they can reach the hands of the consumer, must be increased and made more ready to the dealers who supply the articles. There must be more Smithfields opened, more Covent Gardens, and more Billingsgates. If, in regard to the latter, it be necessary that the supply of fish to the metropolis be brought in the first instance to one spot, other lesser Billingsgates should be established, to which the fish should be conveyed in smaller though still in large parcels, at which the retail dealers may make their purchases. We Londoners increase quicker than our forethought. In America they count their coming people and provide for their wants. In France of late years they have done the same. Paris requires less exertion to feed than London, being, let us say, 2/3 as big, and the gastronomic powers of the ordinary Frenchman fall short of English energy. But the arrangements made in Paris are much better than those which prevail with us. Let the resident in some quiet West End street make a morning round and see with his own eyes what Smithfield is doing early in the morning, or what Billingsgate, or, once again, what Covent Garden. Only let him go on foot. He will not find it easy to make his way on any vehicle, and will be surprised to think that a cart laden with provisions should make its way out of that confusion rapidly enough and safely to supply his wants. This mass of confusion, out of which order is at last extracted by the dint of infinite energy, but with considerable delay, is occasioned by the fact that the retail dealers have to send for their goods to the one central metropolitan market. If our reader will go to Billingsgate, for we are at present dealing with the fishmonger, he will find the carts of these energetic tradesmen at an early hour in the morning, say between 6 and 7, drawn up in line, with the tails of the carts to the pavement, in all the streets for nearly half a mile round the market. They are collected in districts perfectly ignorant of fish later on in the day, to the great detriment, as we imagine, of the ordinary shopkeeper. This must be by the tacit permission of the police, over whose rules the force of Billingsgate has prevailed. The institution has grown gradually to its present size, and before the strength of such institutions the police are of no avail. How shall a couple of men compel a whole streetful of fishmongers' carts to move on? The confusion begins from below the Monument, where Thames Street turns to the east at London Bridge, and covers all the lanes between Thames Street, Eastcheap, and Tower Street. The filth of the whole proceeding in and about the market is past describing. But we are bound to say that Billingsgate has lost its character for language and conduct. We were not asked after our watch. We had only thought of our clothes. We did not hear a word that would annoy a lady's ear, and certainly there never was a worse ground for the exercise of a pickpocket's trade. The place swarms with porters carrying loads of fish upon their heads. Out of large vessels which had brought the fish up the river from the fishing boats in which they came, a most soiled regiment of apparently countless market porters, clothed in garments which had once been white, made their way. But alas, the garments are white no longer. Qui color albus erat, nunc est contrarius albo. A market porter with 60 pounds of fish on his head, hurrying along as though all the dinner tables in London depended on his haste, is not a pleasant person to meet in a passage barely broad enough for one, and such were the passages through which they have to make their way, and it must not be understood that special ways were appropriated to them. You, wandering through the market down to the river, are as much in your rights as the man who is at work. But you will find yourself to be the only person there not intent on supplying London with fish, and though no one will be wilfully uncourteous to you, you may find yourself hustled. We made inquiry as to the work and wages of these men, and learned that they begin at about 3 o'clock in the morning and will work till 10, or till any time after 10 to which they may be needed. The fish continues to arrive indeed during the whole day, but in lesser quantity. The work is paid for by the piece, 3d. for carrying the load out to the fishmonger's cart, and 1.5d. for depositing it within the market. A porter will thus earn 10 shillings a day, but we were informed by a communicative policeman that a hard-working man, by continuing at it through the whole day, would make £1. We should be sorry to disturb them at their trade, but we cannot but think that that concourse of fishmongers' carts at one place is unnecessary. There are, no doubt, subsidiary markets in London, but they are mean and poor and unpalatable, and are not even intended for the use of the consumers of the West End. The great magnates of the fishmongers' trade are supplied direct from Billingsgate. Partially, we are told, they receive their goods direct from the seaports or from the salmon rivers, but the bulk of those alluring features which they display to us amidst beds of marble and ice are formed from freights which took quite another appearance when landed out of the boats at Billingsgate. Great assistance is given in disposing of their freight in good order by the fact that a portion of them is brought up the river in large water tanks, and that the fisherman brings not only the fish to market, but the sea itself to preserve the fish. Thus the sole is landed absolutely fresh under the walls of our custom house, and the unenduring sea elements are preserved, so that the fish with all its briny excellences may more surely be brought to the table of the fishmonger's customer. But with all this you, my reader, find a difficulty not altogether to be overcome in procuring your fresh whiting for breakfast at 9 o'clock. There need be no such difficulty if some primary division be made at Billingsgate, and the divided portion be carried off to some subsidiary market. The fishmonger is a painstaking individual, more thoroughly aware perhaps than any other tradesman that his prosperity in trade must depend on the excellence of his article. There are butchers, no doubt, who are indifferent as to their meat, and those even who carry on their trade with the express purpose of supplying, perhaps of charging for, that which is only second best. Of bakers we are sure that they disregard the palates of their customers, and calculate that they may best make their fortunes by selling bread which shall be bad and ill made. Grocers undoubtedly find their account in selling not the best tea, not the best coffee, not the best sugar, and not the best figs. The same thing may be said with more or less of insistence, but with perfect truth, of almost every London tradesman. And it is well there should be shops at which you shall be able to buy second-class goods, if you do not wish to pay a first-class price. But such is not the case with the fishmonger. We once knew a gentleman who, on asking the price of a sole, was told that he could have one fresh for a shilling, but that a stinking sole would cost him 6d. He immediately ordered the latter, but we have always regarded him as an exception. A fishmonger, if he intend to thrive, must have his fish fresh, and of good quality. No doubt you, my reader, though you be a good customer, do occasionally find that you have not been well treated. Fish comes to your table which is coarse or woolly, occasionally which is stale. We cannot here altogether defend the fishmonger simply on the score of accident. We think that he does know the quality of the fish he sends out, but he is bound to draw a certain line of excellence. He cannot get all of the very best, though he is careful to have none that he considers bad. Sometimes a fish gets tumbled in which is not absolutely fresh. You have to take your chance with others in receiving the ordinary treatment due to an ordinary customer. If indeed you are, perchance, known for your liberality or your exactness of taste, or better still, for your severity, you may escape, but you will find it very troublesome to acquire a character so established. Of late years we have all of us observed, as the evening hours come on, a gathering of poor persons in front of certain fishmongers' shops, and are aware that it is a means by which the unsold fish is conveyed away. The fish bought in the morning is thus made to disappear before the night comes. It is a valuable knowledge to have, so that that crowd may be said to act to that fishmonger in the way of an advertisement. Here, at any rate, you will find no stale fish tomorrow. Kind-hearted old ladies think that the fish is given away. We fancy that trade is not carried on after that manner, and that the fish so disposed of appears again on the following day in the hawker's cart, and is sold at a much depreciated price. We have learned that from other fishmonger shops further eastward every pound of fish not sold at a certain hour is returned to Billingsgate, and there disposed of to the hawkers. There can be no doubt that it finds its way to those whom it suits to buy a depreciated article at a depreciated price. End of section 7. Section 8 of London Tradesmen. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. London Tradesmen by Anthony Trollope, The Greengrocer. We presume that if a fruiterer or a vendor of flowers keeping his shop in Piccadilly or in Cheapside were called a greengrocer, he would feel himself insulted. At any rate, he would be misnamed as the trades are now divided. We use the term, however, being desirous of combining the whole trade as carried on at Covent Garden under one head. The entire business was carried on together in one shop some 30 years since, and is still so conducted in places a little removed from the localities of fashion and high commerce above named. In latter years a flower market has been added to Covent Garden. In other respects the accommodation afforded in the metropolis for the primary collection of a greengrocer's goods is confined to the same space now which it occupied at the beginning of the century. We do not say that there are no other markets in London. As in regard to meat and fish, so in reference to vegetables, there are no doubt many markets, such as are the markets in small towns, used for the supply of those who do not choose to pay the higher prices of shopkeepers. But these do not affect to any great extent the central depot from which the retail tradesmen supply themselves. They are, in part, themselves furnished from Covent Garden, and apply in general to the east or non-consuming part of London. That enormous congregation of eaters which extends from Hampstead on the north to Camberwell on the south, and, shall we say, from the Bank to some region beyond Hammersmith to the west, is fed with vegetables and fruit from Covent Garden. Nor may we confine its customers to the limits so named. It is open to all the world, and is used by the entire metropolitan world of London, and to some extent to persons beyond the metropolis who can afford to pay the best price for the best article. That fact, however, conveys no information to the ordinary reader. There is the market, he can afford to pay. He gets his green peas and salad at his club, and strawberries long before they are in season when he dines out. And what more does he want? London is his feeding ground, and London is well supplied. Peaches! Why, we had any amount of peaches at Mrs. Jones's yesterday, he says to his politico-economical friend, who early in June is speaking to him of the enormous difficulty in supplying London with fruit. Why should a man who can have any amount of peaches at Mrs. Jones's trouble himself with the question as to how he and the rest of the world may get them? Should he wish to know anything of the difficulty, let him go to Covent Garden at 4 o'clock in the morning. He can take it as he returns home from Mrs. Jones's great ball. Or if consideration for his pumps will prevent that, and if he cannot really endure to be up at such an hour in that locality, let him take a bed at the Tavistock Hotel. If he secures a front room, which would be easy, he will have an idea of the wretched combat going on under his window without even getting out of bed to see it. As any extension of space at Covent Garden has been deemed to be an impossibility, excepting that floral market at the southeast corner which has been opened with the object of including an additional trade, and which in no way relieves the old business, as an extension of space has been impracticable, some relief has been found in an extension of time. The hours of ordinary buying and selling are thrown later, so as to give more of the morning to the receipt of the goods and to the disposing of them to the retail dealers, and the market customers are compelled to come earlier and still earlier. Unfortunately, the theatres and the vegetables are contained in nearly the same locality. Drury Lane and Covent Garden, the Lyceum and the Gaiety, are all on the confines of the market. The two interests are equally powerful, or else the carts would begin to come before midnight. Soon after midnight they do begin, and then arises a clamour and a confusion which we hold to be disgraceful to London. Not that the men employed are unruly, either the carters or the porters or the denizens of the market or the retail dealers who come early for their goods. The days are gone by in which trade and rowdyism would league themselves together. The men are there to earn their bread as best they can under very unpleasant circumstances, and they go through their daily work simply with a desire to bring it to an end. But the noise, the confusion, the struggle, the fight are necessary adjuncts to the work of placing wagons within a space altogether insufficient for the work to be accomplished. We never hear that the carmen and porters ill-treat or massacre each other. That there should be so much forbearance is the marvel. The respectability with which men have to do disagreeable work, not punching each other's heads, not trampling upon one another, not indulging in above an average number of good-humored curses, is marvelous to the man not accustomed to it, who views it as a sightseer. Is it all necessary? And if necessary, to what will it come at last? Even in the afternoon, when Covent Garden is simply the resort of ordinary buyers, it is not a spot of which London can be proud. Let the inquirer visit the halls in Paris and observe the approaches, the spaces, the way in which the stalls are disposed, and the aspect of the women, and then let him do the same at Covent Garden. I do not think that if he be an Englishman he will be proud. We have heard two reasons alleged for the difference. We are first reminded of our excessive and rapidly increasing population. Our consumption is so enormous that we cannot keep pace with it in our endeavor to provide for it. The other is the nature of the locality, and of all other localities. The market is confined by houses built in on each side so as to prevent enlargement. And the market itself has proved to be so noisy and unpleasant a neighbor that rival Covent Gardens would not be admitted in other spots. Northumberland Avenue we have heard named, or Russell Square, or Horresco Referens, a strip taken off from the Green Park facing Piccadilly. In Paris there would be no difficulty. All objections must be made to give way before the public need. But it is only necessary to name these London sights to call to mind the fatal obstacles which would prevail. And yet something must be done. This huge concourse of people goes on growing from day to day at a rate of increase which can hardly be counted and cannot be stopped. And even as new masses come, they consume more than did the old masses before. It is not only that there will be a new 250,000 in 10 years, but that the new 250,000 will eat more fruit and vegetables than did the last. They will have more money to pay for fruit, and will altogether be a people more difficult to serve. How much do we demand with which our fathers dispensed? In the same ratio will our sons demand more than do we ourselves. Where are we to find the accommodation? Or how are we to begin to look for it? Is it absolutely necessary that the fruit and vegetables required for London's supply should pass in and out of the 4 rows of building within which Covent Garden is now confined? So far we have said nothing of the greengrocer himself. He is indeed a person with whom our personal acquaintance is very limited, but we are bound to say that he sells his goods generally in a bad condition and at an exorbitant price. It may be that neither of these faults is inherent in him. The condition of his goods depends probably on the packing, to which they have been subjected quite as much as on their original virtue. Or rather, let their original virtue have been what it may, it has been so far obliterated by the packing as to have robbed the things packed of half their flavor. Vegetables have to come from long distances, and vegetables should be housed and cooked and almost eaten with their bloom about them. There can be but little of the bloom left after their passage through Covent Garden, even for those which are grown in the neighborhood of the metropolis. When they come from Holland or from the Scilly Islands, what hope can there be for them? Still, they might be spared the 12 additional hours rendered necessary by their journey to Covent Garden. For the price, Covent Garden, we think, cannot be made responsible. That a great part of the cost of articles so readily perishable should go to the charges of transit and the incidental expenses of the trade is a matter of necessity. The fruiterer cannot put his peach by and sell it next week if it remains unsold this week, nor can he arrange so steady a demand for peaches as the butcher does for legs of mutton. Or if he do so arrange it, he is entitled to a high profit by his supremacy in the trade. But we fear that there are causes for the present scale of prices other than these. The exuberance of the wealth of the country in vegetable and fruit has an embargo placed upon it between the care of the grower and the wants of the customer, so that an artificial scarcity is engendered. This prevails especially in regard to fruit, as to which it pays the retail dealer better to sell small quantities at high prices than to see the cost reduced by plenty. The trade is in the hands of comparatively a few, and the natural result follows. The opening of 2 or 3 new Covent Gardens would greatly tend to remedy this evil. End of section 8.
Chapter 9 of London Tradesmen. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. London Tradesmen by Anthony Trollope. Chapter 9. The Wine Merchant. Some time since we were sitting in the closet which it pleases us to call our book-room, intent on our daily literary work, in which we do not love to be interrupted, when the maiden who answers our knocker came to us announcing a Frenchman with a grand name of which she could make nothing, and putting into our hands a beautifully gilt card, Alphonse de Finaudieu. There was that upon the card, and nothing more. The card declared itself to be a foreign manufacture from its flexibility. We could not refuse admission to a foreigner, probably distinguished in literature, or at any rate connected with it. The man was admitted, and entered with a gracious, perhaps one might almost say a familiar, smile. He grasped our hand, which certainly was ready, and asked us whether we had tried his champagne. Caught! There was not a doubt about it, we had been caught. It is the chief object of our life to avoid such intrusions between 10 and 2 in the morning. It is not only the time that is lost, the current of our thoughts is ruined for the day. The current of our thoughts never amounts perhaps to very much, but we like to have it at our command. We were aware at once that Monsieur de Finaudieu's coming had so disturbed us that the current would not, for this day, be worth anything. And the man had boldly asked us, almost with a reproach, without the slightest misgiving as to his own position in our house, whether we had ever tried his champagne. "No, sir, and don't mean," we said, dropping his hand instantly. He was a handsome man, with a broad chest and fine, flowing, wavy hair. He smiled again, with something almost of contempt in his countenance, and began his argument. We did not ask him to take a seat, nor did we sit ourselves, but we shook our head. "Nothing on earth would induce us to try your champagne, or any other of your wines," we said. But still he prevailed so far that he induced us to take his prospectus out of his hand, and when at last he left us, without a single civil word spoken on our side, he assured us, with that diabolically provoking smile of his, that he was sure that before long we should send for a sample of his champagne. "Nothing on earth can be more improbable," we shouted after him as he left the room. But we could see from the back of his neck that he grimaced again. We were so angered by his imperturbable effrontery that we resigned the current of our thoughts altogether, and took to a cigar for our consolation. Monsieur Alphonse de Finaudieu is a London wine merchant, of one sort. Mr. Prettyman is also a wine merchant. He is a handsome old gentleman with grey hair, always well-dressed, who goes about London in a pillbox brougham, by which he is well known to all men who know anything, and to dine with whom is, according to our ideas, the acme of human bliss. It is a great thing to get pretty men to dine with you, but it is glorious to have to dine with pretty men. How is it that he has his wine in such condition that no one else can approach it? You might, no doubt, buy the same wine from his house, or have bought it in some previous stage of its and of your existence. He does not have a special tipple made for his own drinking. And then he talks about his wine with a modest humour, but with a gentle sarcasm. He is always the fine gentleman, though he never drops the wine merchant. What stories he can tell of the past history of London gourmets! He knows the whole history of the wine trade for 50 years, and speaks of the good old time when men laid down great cellars. The drinkers of wine now send to him for 6 dozen, for 3, or even for a dozen at a time, and wisely impose upon him the duty of keeping the wine, and charging for the capital required. Chance circumstances have brought us to know Prettyman, but he lives chiefly with men of fashion and with men of wealth. He is very decided in his own opinion, but presses it on no one. I should as soon think of asking the collector of income tax to take less than his due, as of proposing to Prettyman any diminution of his prices. Did any customer ever suggest discount to him? Once a year his bill comes, and it may remain unpaid for another without remark. Then the customer is reminded. But the sums of money supposed to be due to Prettyman by the world of fashion are very large. This is a wine merchant of another sort. Some years ago, a leading member of our club, a man whom most men wish to oblige, assured us in a friendly whisper that his friend Potter in the city had some very peculiar port. This member had suggested that we should dine together. The invitation was almost a distinction, and we promised our friend that we would visit his friend, Mr. Potter, in the city. We were not then aware that our friend received a regular salary for touting for Mr. Potter. We went to Mr. Potter at St. Botolph's, and there in a little dark room tasted some admirable port wine. The price was very high, and we allowed ourselves only 2 dozen. But before we left the room, we had purchased a hogshead of claret, at a very reasonable figure, considering the character which we received from Mr. Potter of the vintage to which it belonged. This occurred 10 years ago, and the wine should now be at its best. We bought it in a glow of enthusiasm, with a vain hope that we might in coming years delight our friends at a lesser cost than that which old Prettyman would charge us. Alas, alas, we have already given up that hope. That wine will delight no one. Mr. Potter was a pleasant, dapper, genial little Englishman, halfway, we may say, between Monsieur Alphonse de Finadieu and Mr. Prettyman. Why he should have had such good port wine and such bad claret, we have never discovered. But we give him as a type of a third sort of wine merchant. There are many others, running from Prettyman downwards, whom we need not attempt to describe with graphic individuality. As a rule, we think it safer to the public either to trust the Prettymans, or to abandon all hope of giving their friends good wine. We do not say that a medium wine may not be obtained at a much lower cost, and of a quality which shall enable the giver to escape absolute contempt and reprobation. But no man who knows what wine is will dine with him in the hope of drinking what is good. There are houses at which the wine is brought to you as a necessary adjunct to your dinner, and at which you take what you want simply as a necessary adjunct. At such houses you neither receive nor expect the peculiar pleasure which the lover of the grape receives from good wine. Such are, perhaps, the the majority of the dinner-giving establishments in London. You go there for the sake of society. You go there for fashion. You go there because the host and hostess dined with you. You go there because you have nothing else to do with yourself. You go there perhaps for the sake of what you will eat. But you do not go there enticed even in part by the hope of what you may drink. There are other houses, and the fact is declared in sorrow and not in bitterness, at which it is dangerous to dine because of the poisonous mixtures which are administered to you. Where the owner of such a house may deal for his wine, he never mentions, at any rate at his table. When we have suffered by such treatment, and we have suffered grievously, we have, since the visit of Alphonse de Finadieu to our sanctum, connected our sick headache with his establishment. We do think that such dangers should be avoided. We protest that on such occasions our potations have been not deep, but still we have been ill, very ill. We are astonished to find how little wine will do it. There is no doubt a great economy, a double economy in the process, as in accordance as the wine is cheap, so do the guests drink little. But there is a wickedness in it for which there can be no pardon. Wholesome beer, or whiskey and water, are beverages which a man may swallow and rise to his next day's work in comfort. But wine from the cellars of Alphonse de Finadieu is a sin not to be forgiven. It is safer to stick to prettymen and give few dinners and wines of less costly names. Much of the wine consumed in London is drunk at clubs and hotels. The former are generally supplied by good wine merchants, and the wine, though perhaps badly chosen, is pure of its kind and wholesome. It is not often that a wine merchant will venture to send bad wine to a club, though he will not unfrequently send wine of lesser merit and caliber than the name it bears. At special hotels, which have a character to lose, or desire to make one, great pains are taken in selecting the best wine which they can afford to buy. At others, an advertised wine is generally used, which is, we believe, pure and wholesome juice of the grape, though it chooses to pass itself by names to which it is not entitled. The wines to which we allude are generally worth the sum paid for them. We only wish the givers of dinners would never have any worse at their tables. End of Chapter 9. Read by Harrison Otis, Waco, Texas, June 3rd, 2023. Chapter 10 of London Tradesmen. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. London Tradesmen by Anthony Trollope. Chapter 10. The Coal Merchant. Where is the father of a family, or the mother of a family, or the daughter, or the son, who does not expend much energy in exclaiming against advertising tradesmen? It is not the tradesman who inserts his advertisement in some circular, of whom the family complain, or who sticks it upon some wall, or affixes it to the board of a cab, or pays Mr. Willing for giving it a place in the Underground Railway carriages. It is not as to them that the family is loud in its condemnation. That has grown to be so much a matter of course that it receives no special attention. The advertiser, in these instances, no doubt leaves an impress on the mind of the reader which, in some manner which the reason can hardly fathom, answers his purpose. You know that Jones has invented a pair of breeches, and though you don't want breeches, and ridicule Jones, still you talk about it. He does not anger you by his intrusion, which is not specifically addressed against yourself. The advertising tradesman who is hated invades you in your own house, and makes it impossible for you to avoid his circulars. He fills your letterbox and forces upon you the necessity of some discrimination before you destroy his notice. We have told how the unknown wine merchant works upon his victim. He is a grievous nuisance. At the moment of his coming, is the worst nuisance among tradesmen. But he does not come often. He will make his appearance, perhaps, annually, unless you insult him, and the chances are that there will not be above 2 or 3 in the year. But of all your correspondence, the coal merchant is the most persevering, the most affectionate, and the most annoying. A tradesman's advertisement, when put into the letterbox, used 2 or 3 years ago to make its appearance in the shape of a loose slip. It troubled you a little, but was easily consigned to your basket. We doubt whether the coal merchant was not the first who inserted his in fastened envelopes. They then used to come with the word coal on the outside. Our wife, meaning to be economical, and thinking that something might be gained, would keep them, and they perplexed us by their reappearance. But of late the telltale word has been dropped, and the notices come up to us with our regular letters. They are even sent by the post, at what must surely be a great cost, because it has come to be understood that they will not otherwise be opened. And they are sent periodically. Messrs. Black and Sparkles desire to inform us from month to month what are their lowest prices for all descriptions of coal. They supply you with a list, from which you are supposed to be able to discriminate the best or the worst. And it seems to us that they do always quote a price somewhat lower than that which we pay for the coal we use. Having an old-fashioned hatred to this mode of forcing a trade, we have never dealt with the senders of these circulars. We never shall deal with them. But, for aught we know, they might, if applied to, furnish us with the most excellent article. But do people buy more coals because of such notices? And is it not the fact that the purchasers of the coals must pay for the printing of the notices, and the paper, and the postage? The same remarks apply to most trades, but they appear at the present moment to be peculiarly applicable to this, which, but a few years since, was conducted on simpler principles. When we speak of simple principles in trade, we do in fact mean those that are honest. It does seem to us that the man who had opened his place of business and waited till customers came to him carried on his trade in a manner more likely to be fair. He either had inherited the business, or had commenced it on the strength of connections by means of which he hoped to make an income. The income which he did make was not expended in advertising costs. He bought his coals, if not at the pit's mouth, from some intermediate dealer, and succeeded or failed, chiefly as his customers might or might not be numerous. There was no deceit, at any rate, in the system. Paterfamilias, who keeps a house and burns coals, did not hear much of him till his bills came in. But the present aspirant begins by giving his wished-for customers to understand that, having obtained the command of several of the most valuable collieries in England, and having devoted much personal attention to the subject, he has found himself able to supply you with coals, of which he sends you a catalogue at certain defined prices. He sometimes informs you that the offer is only to hold good for a month. Your first impression would be one of wonder that men so great in commerce should find it worth their while to trouble themselves by writing to you upon the subject. We remember when we turned it over in our minds, thinking that some one of our acquaintance had been kind enough to name us to Messrs. Black and Sparkles. But custom has quite made us used to it. Indeed, on 1 or 2 occasions we have run down the Messrs. Black and Sparkles of the moment, and have found them to be not at all conspicuous in commerce. We believe that they generally own no collieries, they are the masters of no wharves, they have no great depot for coals, no shop. Coals themselves in the bulk are not a thing to which they have given much of their attention. They are the agents, perhaps, for some dealer who lives in the coal countries, and they receive a percentage upon what coals they can sell. In this there is nothing dishonest. Commission agents are common in trade, and why not in coal as well as in other matters? But the words in which their tenders appear are not altogether honest. They do not inform you that they, the senders, apply on behalf of big country dealers. They assume an attitude which is not their own, and endeavor to inveigle you by the idea of their grandeur. But what does it matter if you get good coals at a reasonable price? That, no doubt, is your only object in all your dealings with tradesmen, to get the articles which they sell good, and not to pay too high a price for them. But in that matter of price you have hardly a standard to go by, and the mind will refer itself to the preliminary cost. If that civil letter comes to me, then it goes also to all the street, to all the quarter of the town. And Messrs. Black and Sparkles have first to look how they shall repay themselves for that expenditure, before they shall appropriate any of the money which they shall acquire to the purchase of coals. In some trades, the great effort of the business seems to be that of advertising. We have heard of the annual tens of thousands expended on Holloway's pills and ointments, on Rowland's Calidor, and Revelenza Arabica, and we have not been much moved by these disclosures, not wanting these articles ourselves, and feeling in regard to such nostrums that it did not much matter in what way the money obtained was applied. But we must all use coals. Before we comply with any of the offers made to us by Messrs. Black and Sparkles, we should like to see their advertising bill in all its details, and compare the amount expended by them in procuring the coals which they offer to sell. You need not, it is true, deal with Messrs. Black and Sparkles. You may go to your old family coal merchants, Messrs. Brown and Stout of Lower Thames Street, and get your coal without paying for any advertisement. But even Messrs. Brown and Stout, respectable old tradesmen though they be, are, we fear, more or less affected by these new-fangled ways of trade. The advertising world is becoming too strong for them, and they are forced to accommodate, at any rate, their prices to those charged by their energetic rivals. The price of coals in London is very high as compared to those demanded in the country, where means of transit are not so cheap or so assured. It is well known that the city of London possesses a privilege in regard to coal consumed within a certain distance. How this octroi is maintained, we have never been aware, but as to its existence, we believe there is no doubt. The liability of 4 million inhabitants to the payment of such a tax is a matter as to which we here raise no question, though we do not understand why it should be collected from coal and from other articles of daily consumption. This, no doubt, is in part the means of increasing the price of the article, and making it heavier in the metropolis than elsewhere. But we still think that we here in London pay too high a price for what we burn, and we attribute this in part to the machinations of Messrs. Black and Sparkles. End of Chapter 10. Read by Harrison Otis, Waco, Texas, June 19th, 2023.
Section 11 of London Tradesmen. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Beeswax Candle. London Tradesmen by Anthony Trollope. The Haberdasher. The haberdasher of whom we are about to speak is a concrete and not an abstract haberdasher. But as there have been given to the word various etymologies, so that no one can say for certain whence it has come, the concrete may be as well understood by it as the abstract. There is a theory that the original haberdasher was a vendor of feminine neck-gear, and another that he dealt in unconsidered trifles. They cannot be said to be the same, because trifling as are the garments with which necks are clothed, they are not worn without consideration. But the great firms of today, The Marshalls and Snellgroves, the Meekings and the Whiteleys still sell the trifles named, though they have stretched their trade so as to include all manner of women's clothing and many articles worn by men. Indeed, as new capital has been created, they have gone much further than this, and advanced from ladies' wardrobes to ladies' requisites generally, to sheeting and towels and bed curtains, thence to other curtains and to carpets, and have taken in the whole world of upholstery. We are told that you may now buy from these haberdashers a dining-room table or a kitchen fireplace, and that there is extant an emporium at which you may also purchase the leg of mutton to be cooked at the one and eaten off the other. Nevertheless, we do not know how to describe the tradesmen who keep these marts by a better name than that of haberdashers. But though the articles in which the tradesmen deal are so far of the masculine gender, still we fancy that their customers are mostly of the other sex. It may be said that shop customers generally are chiefly women, that shopping is a woman's term and a woman's practice, and that all the world over, though the money is made by the men, it is spent by the women. But the peculiarity is specially remarkable in regard to these larger places of business. Send a man alone out into the world to buy a pair of gloves, and he will go to some discreet and modest glove shop, from which, when he has paid his 3 shillings 6 over the counter, he can walk away. But his wife, having to make the purchase for him, will probably go into an emporium at one door and pass out when she has spent her pleasant half-hour at another, having, with great satisfaction to herself, been referred to the cashier when she has completed her purchase. There is, we think, nothing in which the difference of taste between the two sexes is more visible than in the reputation in which these shops are held by men and women. The man's idea is that the mercer should sell cloth, and the silk merchant silk, and the upholsterer tables. He may be beaten from it by the alleged greater cheapness of the store, but the spirit of logic, of which he is unconscious, tells him that the man who deals in gloves only will know most about gloves. His wife has no spirit of logic, consciously or unconsciously. It is a trouble for her to find out the really good glove shop, and in the long run she is satisfied with gloves from Marshall and Snellgroves. And moreover, the plan offers to the ladies some of those club attractions which her husband has at his disposal. She can lounge there and talk, and be surrounded by pretty things. She can meet her friends. She will always be treated with courtesy if she does not intrude too far on the forbearance of those who are appointed to serve her. She may intrude very far, and yet be endured, so indispensable is it to the establishment to obtain a character for urbanity. The training to which men must be subjected before they succeed in selling a yard of tape or a dozen of buttons would have sufficed to make them stand as heroes before an enemy's guns. We doubt whether women are ever so well trained. They show their impatience and their weariness, and not having the difference of sex to add a something of gallantry to their intercourse, they are apt to show that they are put out, and to entail upon the house a feeling that incivility may be met there. In all this, the marvel is that they who are paid not over well for their services should give so much for their wages, and that the public in return should expect such great consideration for a little custom. But the great question of all is that which appertains to the excellence of the article to be bought and to the cheapness. Can you, at these large marts, get your wife's clothes and your own, and your furniture and your fittings and your household linen as well as you may do at shops simply appropriated to a single trade? It would at first certainly seem natural that better goods should be found with the individual dealers, and if the better, then probably the cheaper. But at the same time we are quite sure that articles much worse may be procured so also. The depths of badness to which the small dealer finds himself compelled to descend in quest of profit upon which he may live can hardly be fathomed. But as his inferiority descends infinitely below the average of the great mart, so can the tradesman who really knows his business and has made for himself a trade on which he can live rise above it. Wine, we are told, is sold at these marts, But how shall a man purchase for his customers wine of the best who is not devoted to the work, the study of his life? We cannot but imagine that the same care is necessary in buying the material for curtains, and that the man who does that and little else will sell to his customers the best that the trade supplies. There is another aspect under which these shops should be regarded, and one perhaps the most important of all. The employment given in trade to men and women, though it is secondary as an object, is in its influences essential to the welfare of the community. The number of persons who thus seek their bread, their respectability, or what, to use a broad term, we may call their happiness, gives a so vital effect that we should wonder that some Act of Parliament has not been passed for their welfare, were it not that we do not quite believe in the good done by such matters by Acts of Parliament. In the first place, we have to consider the persons employed as men or as women. Regarding the work of such shops to be within the compass of female hands, and being within this compass to be more appropriate to them than to men, there is, we think, a general feeling of sorrow that so many men should be employed. Seeing that we are at our wits' end what to do with a certain number of thousands of women for whom the world finds it very difficult to afford employment, we think it a pity that a source of employment for which females are fitted should be filled to so great an extent by men. But I think we may take it for granted that when men are employed, women are not equally fit. They are much cheaper, and they are apparently more easily managed. But they are cheaper because they cannot do the same amount of work, and their management is more easy only in externals. We were assured by a man who had long been in the trade, and had considered the subject thoroughly, that even for the rolling of ribbon, a man, though he cost much more, did the work at a cheaper rate per yard, and did it better. His strength tells, even in the rolling of ribbon, and then he brings to the task a certain adaptability to work which nature has given to him in greater profusion than to the female. To do and to go on doing that which is required of him, to go on with it till it be completed, is peculiar to him. The woman is not equally mindful, or equally steady. It will take many words to make the man understand what he has to do. To make the woman understand it will take very few. The average man will not be at his best for work until he is 25, whereas at 18 the woman will be as effective as age can make her. The woman will understand more perfectly than the man the theory on which the ribbon is rolled, but she will not do it. She will grow weary and skimp her work, or leave her job unfinished if not looked after. The tradesman, following many women and many men over many rolls of ribbon, will find that with the man he has had the cheaper bargain. But still give the preference to the woman, the philanthropist will say. This is her appropriate work, and let her do it, even though you should prove that the man can do it better. Alas, my loving friend, philanthropy can guide the world to no such preferment. A woman may be employed on charity, but women as a race cannot look to charity for their daily bread. Nor do they wish it. Their cry is one for equality. In every word which comes from them, and from their friends on these matters, they proclaim themselves to be the man's equal. In intellectual capacity, we think they are so, but not in that drastic performance of the world's tasks for which patience, continuity, and strength are required. But for the amelioration of the condition of women when employed, something may be done. In those large houses of which we have spoken, especially in the one to which we have alluded, very much has been done. The complaint has been that the assistants are not allowed to sit. The thoughtless purchaser, on entering a shop, and finding that those who should attend upon her are seated at their ease, is apt to feel that she is neglected. The very lady whose soft heart is turned to pity by the hardships to which these females are subjected will unconsciously feel that she is ill-used when she finds that none are apparently ready to receive her. This is so much the case that at smaller shops the proprietors cannot afford to give the requisite ease to a fashion as set the way, until the larger marts have accustomed the public to see those who are to serve them seated behind their counters. This will come when the public have asked for it with sufficient earnestness. But how about those long hours of incessant toil which, whether standing or sitting, the female frame cannot endure without injury? At the large shops, the system is sufficiently extended to admit of relays and absences to meals, sufficiently long, and of hours adapted to sanitary principles. And at the very small shops, where the proprietor with one or two assistants performs the work, no great hardship is felt. It is at the intermediate establishments that something is necessary. At these, the early closing on Saturday is the greatest boon which has yet been bestowed. End of section 11. End of London Tradesmen by Anthony Trollope.